like I tell my players almost every game, like, all right, make a mistake today. I want you to get out there and make a mistake, because that means you're trying. If you're not trying, you're not going to make a mistake. If you're just going to do the basic things. My philosophy is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is turn into a little bit of let them play.
Hello to our fellow coaches. Welcome to another installment of On the Fly. This is a podcast in which youth coaches are having casual conversations about our craft. I'm Joey Picard, joined as always by Coach Martin Bowes, Director of Coach Education and Development for Massachusetts Youth Lacrosse. And Martin, you and I have to be sure to be on our very best behavior today, because we're joined by El Jefe, Kevin Barney, our boss, GM, Executive Director of Mass Youth Lax. Kevin, welcome. All of the MYL coaches have gotten to know you as our league leader. You're kind of omnipresent through the coaching clinics, the regional meetings, the newsletters, videos we do. And we're all very, very lucky to have you steering the ship. But today we're talking to you as a coach, not admin of the league, not to mention board member and director of your town program, which I see that you're sporting now, the Stoughton Youth Lacrosse program. But really, this is Coach Barney, fearless captain of the Stoughton girls 7th and 8th grade team. You're here to join us, and we're going to talk about game day strategies for coaches, specifically how we can strive to let go of the control and enjoy watching the kids go out and play and make decisions on their own. That's a truly wonderful philosophy, but we're going to kind of get into it and ask, does it work? Is that easy to pull off? So let's talk about it and find out. But first, I'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about the organizations you worked at before you joined Mass Youth Lax, and then a little bit about your time with Mass Youth Lax.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on. Excited to always talk with you guys about lacrosse and coaching and what we're trying to do with it. But I think my history probably starts back with just the love of sports from when I was probably 4 years old. Fall in love with watching sports, playing sports, being a part of it. Remember telling my parents in high school, like, hey, I don't want to go to school for engineering. I want to go to school for sports, and then thinking I was crazy. But we settled on, a college, Springfield College. My parents have lived there before I was born, so they knew it as a really good sports athletic school on the kind of, academic side and coaching, philosophical side, things like that. And so was a Springfield College graduate and majored in sport management. Then I've worked kind of across a lot of different sports during my career. Started off working in golf, and then went to work for the Patriots and Revolution for 7 years during the glory days in the early 2000s, and watching them win Super Bowls. And I was working with the Revs, and we went to 3 straight MLS Cups and all part of that. And then I shifted over into lacrosse, had an opportunity to go work for the Boston Cannons. After being there for a year, the general manager left, and the owner and he called me into his office and was like, I'm leaving and I'm putting you in charge. So took the keys of the Boston Cannons, and was the GM, vice president and GM of the Cannons for 8 years. We won our first championship in 2011, and then had the pleasure the next season in the MLL draft, and picking up Quincy's own Martin Bowes in the MLL draft to the Cannons. So Marty and I have a long history together with the Cannons. And then I came on board, started working with then MBYLL back in end of 2017, early 2018, when I left the Cannons, kind of start something on my own and wanted to be more home, more involved. My kids were young then and starting to do this stuff. So, wanted to be more involved in that youth level and really, having an impact on the growth of the game. And I've been involved with, obviously with MBYLL, now Mass Youth Lacrosse, with it. But, as you said too, I like to tell everyone, especially all the coaches and town leaders I'm working with, like, hey, I'm you. I'm the girls director here in Stoughton. My kids play. I've coached boys, girls, spent more time now coaching on the girls side. We started the girls program. I helped start it when my daughter was in first grade, and been coaching her all the way through. This is her 8th grade year. So it's kind of my last hurrah, probably on the girls side. My younger son will still be playing, but, been coaching for the last 7 years, and, excited at what we're doing and having this discussion.
To a point, I think that sometimes when we're involved at league leadership, we have to make tough decisions that don't seem like it's favorable to everybody, but it's for the greater good. But it's more impactful when it's coming from a peer. So the fact that you do coach in this league, the fact that you are involved in your town leadership and you go to regional meetings to represent a town program, it makes it more impactful, in a way that someone can sit there and be like, all right, I get it. He gets it. He's one of us, just as you said. So I bet a lot of the stuff that goes to onto your plate kind of comes from things that you've seen on Sundays and on your practice that you got. Yeah, I've kind of been here. I've lived this experience. So this is not an easy path forward, but we got to figure out a way of making this a fair process for all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm probably a great test case because, having started a girls program and had all these kids who never picked up a stick before and, self-aware, not the greatest coach, and learned on the fly, a little bit on how to coach and, how to coach first, second graders, hadn't done that before. So like many people, when you start out, you may have played and coached or whatever, but, coaching first, second grade boys and girls is a whole different ballgame. And what we're trying to do. So, made a lot of mistakes. I think I've learned from most of them, along the way. So I think that's what's important too.
Well, you're incredibly patient, especially with all the coaches and all the people that you have to deal with. I imagine that you're probably an outstanding coach, very patient with the kids. So I'm really excited for this discussion today. We have an icebreaker, and sometimes we try to stay on topic, sometimes we don't. We happen to be filming this and possibly releasing this the week of Thanksgiving. So first and foremost, happy Thanksgiving to all of our coaches, our listeners, their families. We hope it's a great day. Marty, Kevin, what's your favorite Thanksgiving dish? Side? Is it the main? Is it a dessert? Is it a drink? What's your favorite? Marty, why don't we start with you today?
Well, thanks, KB, for being here. Appreciate all the intro and the gracious hosting that you always do, Coach Joey. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. My favorite dish, easy. It's the stuffing. It's just there. We make multiple different kinds of it. There's like a vegan version. We have a sausage version. So we've got a couple different dishes going on there. But yeah, the stuffing for me, easy.
Is it the real stuffing that you put inside the bird? You cook it inside the bird?
Yeah, one of the dishes goes that way too. And I think really it's just a segue into my second favorite, which is the day after sandwich with everything.
Heck yeah. Good call. Kevin, how about you? What are you looking forward to most about Thursday, food-wise?
Yeah, my favorite has got to be the well-whipped creamy mashed potatoes. That's still one of my favorite. A little butter, then put a whole lot of gravy on top of it. Probably a little biscuit inside to dip in and get a little bit of everything as well.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. You both stole my top two. So my third one I'm going to put in there, and I eat it once a year. That's it. I never eat this year round, but turnips. I actually might go to my mother-in-law's, and she cooks the most amazing meal, and she cooks these turnips in this Pennsylvania bacon fat, and it's just the most unbelievable. I'll eat like 2 pounds of it, between the day and then the week after with the leftovers. So I can't wait. Thanksgiving's my favorite holiday. I was going to be corny and ask us all to say what we're thankful for, but I'll let you save that with your families. I know we're all very thankful to be in this sport, to be in this great league, and to have the opportunity to coach around kids. So that goes without saying. We're always appreciative. And so let's jump into today's topic where we're talking about game day coaching a little bit. I think we'll have a couple of episodes on this for sure. But today we're specifically kind of talking a little bit about the philosophy of being present and, how we're commanding and what we're saying to the kids and what we care about in the moment. I think that's sort of what we want to shape this first discussion on. But before we get into styles and strategies and communication from the bench, let's take a minute to talk about the game day staff. So which may differ from your practice staff in terms of number of coaches and the roles that they play. And this is obviously for youth, which is very different from college, where you might turn on the TV and see 20 coaches wearing polos in and around the team. Obviously, we're a smaller unit for the youth game. So, Kevin, typically on game day, how many coaches are there with you? You included?
I'd say 2.5.
That's
I say that because I have a volunteer high school player. Actually, her and her sister over the last 7 years have both volunteered. And so, the times that they can make it, probably half the time, a little bit more. But I recruited my other volunteer assistant coach the first year when it was just me. And I was like, hey, I need some help. And, asked all the parents like, hey, I don't care. I don't care if you don't need to know the sport. If you can just come, can you put 4 cones in a square? Can you roll a lacrosse ball out? can you line 3 girls up in these areas? You're a coach. Come help me do that. So I've had some fun coaches, but there's typically 2 to 3 of us on the sideline.
What's optimal for you? Is that optimal, or if you had another, you'd use it?
I think that's pretty optimal. Again, I've been coaching mainly on the girls game side. I mean, I think for me, not to jump too far ahead in this conversation, but now, and this is one of the things I've learned over the years, and one of the things I love to do is kind of coach the opposite side of the field, wherever the ball isn't, and kind of be talking down to that end with it. So I kind of let my other coaches like, hey, you deal with, the substitutions and things going on the fly, da da da. I want to be able to talk to the offense when the ball's down, on our defensive end, or talk to my goalie in defense when we have the ball down on the other end, and talk about what's going on.
So it sounds to me like you have a lot of different responsibilities. It's not like you're necessarily appointing offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, sub box. It's more along the lines of, in this moment, I'd like to converse with the girls who aren't active so I can convey a couple of things. You take the others, or deal with the substitution box. And then they have to be pretty versatile and flexible to swap places after if you're going to then go talk to the offense, something like that.
Yeah, it's that. And then, again, starting at 1-2s and 3-4s, it's, hey, Sadie, my great assistant coach, has been with me since the beginning. Like, someone's, got hit on the pinky, or, has a cut and is crying or whatever, go see Coach Sadie. She's my go-to for dealing with the kids. They gotta run to find the restroom and run to it. Go see Coach Sadie. She'll take care of you. So
amazing. And when you have that high school player with you, what responsibilities do you give? Is it he or she? Is it a boy or girl?
She.
Okay.
They help with the substitutions a lot. The kids are always, hey, I want to play this, I want to play that, and I haven't been in a little bit. Can I go play offense, defense? I don't want to play midfield, things like that. So I kind of let them,
manage the questions that come in. That's amazing. Marty, what's your answer to this? I'm dying to hear.
Yeah, I would just say 3. I think as the level gets up, maybe there's a room for 4, but you don't want too many chefs in the kitchen. So I like to keep it simple. I think 3 is probably the ideal number.
And then same question I was asking Kevin in terms of roles and responsibilities, or is it a little bit more on the fly? Everyone kind of sees where they're needed.
Yeah, and obviously it's, context dependent of the skill set of the coaches that you have. Typically, you definitely want someone to really be focused on the substitution, to be more concerned with, especially at the classic level, let's make sure everyone gets playing time. Because it can happen just totally unintended that someone gets kind of gypped out of playing time. So I think someone should really be focused on that. And then if they have the bandwidth to look at some of what's going on in the game, that's great. But you'd also want one of those coaches to really be, I think kind of what Kevin is alluding to, is more focused on watching what's happening in the game and then being strategic about communicating with certain players, whether the ball's on the other side of the field or talking to them as they come off the field. And then, that I think you could get away with 2 in that case. And then that third, depending on the skill set, can be, just context dependent on what their skill set is. Maybe they're more focused on offense versus defense. I think a lot of coaches like to watch everything, and maybe they have an affinity towards, certain types of players that they're able to connect with better. So I think 3 is probably your magic number. 2 is maybe your minimum. You can get away with 1. It just becomes tougher to see the field and focus on substitutions.
And I think a lot of times this becomes a conversation, especially for youth leagues. Maybe there's talks of, do we limit the number? Do we kind of have a best practice? And I think it kind of stems from the fact that when you have more than 3, you have 4, and some programs might even have like 5 coaches. They tend to all want to speak up. And now you have 5 adult voices screaming onto the field, talking to the officials, talking to the players. And that's really what we're looking to avoid. So for me, it's not really necessarily about the number so much as it is making sure that the coaches get together in advance and say, we have roles today. And today I'm going to be the field commander. So the voice is going to be mine. And I'm going to have you help with my substitution. And if you're going to be my offensive minded coach, I want you to talk to the offensive players we're about to sub in. Give them some heads up, things to look out for, things that they did on their last shift that you'd like to see them work on. And when the offensive players come out, talk to them. That way we have established these communications. So for me, I get that, you don't want to have these massive rosters of coaches for a youth game. But the most important part is making sure that we don't have all these adults yelling out different commands, because the kids aren't going to hear you. It's hard to hear one coach, let alone 5, it becomes too much. One thing I had kind of threw in there is the idea of having a different practice squad. And I know that's not the case for many programs. I know a lot of towns, they struggle to get even one extra help, right? So as Kevin did, you're looking for parents who might not have the background, but have a willingness to A, learn, and B, roll their sleeves up and roll ground balls out. I happen to be in a town that has an embarrassment of riches when it comes to people who have either played or have the experience who want to give back. I mean, we have over 350 boys in our program. So there's a lot of dads that raise their hand. And so we, of course, want to say, we'd love to have you and your energy, but I can't have you on game day. So believe it or not, we actually have practice coaches and we have game day coaches. So it's a hard conversation to have. We can talk more about this a little bit. How do you ask a volunteer who wants to be there? There's not enough room for you, but it's something that we've kind of come up with in terms of a way of still getting them involved to say, hey, are you willing on Tuesdays and Thursdays to come help herd the cats, roll the ground balls out, help us with our stations, but be a sport and watch the game with the other parents on the other side. So it's a necessity, but not all these towns kind of have this. So Kevin, I'm just kind of thinking of what you said about you kind of pleading to get a coach to kind of help you. And now you have a really solid co-coach with you. It's been with you for a long time. If you had the opportunity, would you bring more coaches in, even in a practice only setting?
100% would. I know I might have a couple more this year as some of our other coaches now we're at that combo stage for their kids are in 7th grade, mine in 8th grade, with it. But yeah, I think my challenge with practices is not being able to run as many stations. I have my pet peeve of not having a long line of kids in line for any drill. And there's times where I do, because it's just me or, it's just 2 of us and we're just trying to keep things, get it started and keep it moving. But to be able to run multiple things, keep kids more active, work with our goalies. I rarely get to do that, in our practices to be able to do that, work on just draws, certain, aspects of the game. If you have more coaches being able to do that would be a great opportunity.
For sure. Marty, anything to add before we move on?
No, I think that's really interesting what you said about having coaches that are really just focused on practice. And obviously we'll get a little bit more into the differences of the strategy of being a game day coach versus a practice coach. And I also find it a little bit humorous where you talk about, 5 adult voices screaming if you've got 5 coaches on game day. That's a minimum of 5, right? Because we all know there's going to be parents shouting from the sideline. So yeah, I think when you're breaking your kids down on game day, whether that's at halftime or maybe at a timeout, you have the ability to kind of break into 2 huddles. Maybe the team that was the group that was just out on offense, let's talk in this huddle. Team that was just on defense, let's talk in this huddle. That's something you see at the higher levels a lot. And I think there's a magic number for your group. It's not going to be a blanket statement, but having the ability to reach out to parents and have parents that are open and willing to play that role that you just kind of laid out of, hey, we need you on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we need you to be a fan on Sundays and, maybe fill in some cases. I think there's a lot of parents that would actually crush that role and maybe even appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask this year, will any just come help me in coaching, even if it's Tuesdays? And I know I'm going to have an extra body. That'd be great.
It's funny because I've noticed that from 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, you have a lot of parents that will stay for the 60 to 75 to 90 minutes of practice. They kind of want to enjoy it. They want to soak it up. As we start to get to 5th and 6th grade, that tapers off a little bit. By the time 7th and 8th rolls around, there's no parents watching. But especially at that young early age, you have these parents that are there anyways. You could say, hey, come on over, help us. I want to run stations today, and all I need you to do is just roll the ball out and blow the whistle and keep it going and fix the obvious. And we'll talk afterwards or beforehand, but it's plenty of opportunities to do so, especially at the younger levels with the parents that are there. All right. So what's the general philosophy of game day coaching? So what's your approach? Kevin, I'll ask you this first. Besides just setting your lines, what's your kind of go-to ethos?
Yeah, and I guess part of mine has evolved over the years, as I said, and even evolved. It's kind of brought me back to thinking of, all the sports I played and watched growing up where, one of my favorite teams and coaches growing up, I was a big Syracuse men's basketball fan and Coach Jim Boeheim, a legend. But I remember watching him as a kid and, it could be the NCAAs, the Big East championship game. They could be blowing a lead or doing great. And they pan over to the bench and Jim Boeheim's sitting there, as stoic as can be. And, there was times where I was like, coach, do something, with it. And I never, until now, I never really, picked up on the why. And then, as I said, I worked for the Patriots for years, and Belichick, famous for, talking to the defense while the offense was out there playing in the game. He wasn't yelling at them during the play to change this and do that. He'd wait till they're done, And then, like I said, when I started our girls program here, man, I'll never forget that first game. It was awesome. We got our butts kicked, but it was still awesome to have girls lacrosse started. But, I think I had 2 girls, my daughter and one other, who had ever played in a game before. And even in our town, because of coming out of COVID and everything, it was 2021 was our first year. And, most of them hadn't been on the field with the markings and everything. We practiced on our grass field. And I remember that first game, and I remember not being able to talk after because I was directing every single, you name it out there. You go here, you move up, you stay, you pass it to her, move over there, run to behind the goal, all this stuff. And, maybe because I felt responsible. I felt like I had to. Like, it was my job to make sure that they did okay with it. And it probably took me until 3 years later, 2 to 3 years later, to kind of realize, like, you know what, this is not the way to coach, kids, and wanting them to learn and learning that, hey, making mistakes is how you learn. It's not always just doing the right thing or doing what you're told. It's getting out and playing. And that's how you learn to get better. Remember listening to the Thompson brothers just talk about, at our convention, just talk about, playing in the yard and just playing. And that's how you learn to do things. It wasn't like, oh, let's all try to do behind the back. It was like, no, you got in those situations, and because it didn't matter and that it was okay to make a mistake, you could try those things. And so I think, now, like, I tell my players almost every game, like, all right, make a mistake today. I want you to get out there and make a mistake, because that means you're trying. If you're not trying, you're not going to make a mistake if you're just going to do the basic things. So, my philosophy is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is turn into a little bit of let them play. I still catch myself, I coach lacrosse, I coach soccer, and I try to do that. And I coach with moms and dads who yell and scream all the time and try to direct the traffic every which way. And every once in a while, I try to tell them, why don't we just let them play for a little bit? Why don't we tell them after the play what we think they could have done better, or what they did do well, with it, and trying to do that. And it's not easy. As I said, I catch myself sometimes yelling, pass it to Charlotte, pass it to Brooke, look in the middle. And then I'm like, all right, stop, let them play. That's why I said now I love to, when the play goes down to the other side, both point out things they did well, point out things, hey, next time, let's make sure we're looking in this. Let's make sure we're making that dodge first, whatever it might be, to try to help them. Love to talk to the kids on the sideline during the game. Absolutely love to. I think sometimes they look at me like, what are you doing? The game's going on. What are you doing? But, like, hey, let's talk about that last play. That was awesome. Because sometimes they do something good and they don't even know it. They don't know what they did well.
Right.
It was almost the accident. Like, you picked the perfect angle. Like, you made that skip pass. You saw that and did it. And they're like, I don't know. I just saw it, hucked it. Those types of things, so trying to coach, just like we encourage them so much to play off ball, trying to coach off ball, I think, is kind of my philosophy.
I love that. That's a great way. Marty, before you answer this, I have a very important follow-up, Kevin. The first time you told your girls, let's go out and make a mistake today, what was their reaction?
Yeah, I think they started me like, what is coach doing today?
It's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. I do it all. I still do it. I'm like, please. I'm not going to get mad if, I always tell them, I will not get mad at you if you make a mistake because you're trying. I'll get mad at you when you don't do something, when you are scared to do something. Not mad, but that's when I will talk to you, like, hey, we got to, let's do this. We're out here to play. Let's play.
So Marty, is it micromanage? Is it control every little thing they're doing and direct it? Or is it sit back and let them go? Or is there kind of an in-between? What's the ideal scenario for you?
I'm definitely closer to where Kevin's on this spectrum. And before I kind of get into that, I would like to zoom out just a little bit, because if I'm thinking about game day strategy, I'd be remiss not to say, hey, before we get to that day, there should probably have been some practice time delegated to, hey, here's kind of our base level warm up. Our game day warm up, we're going to do this while the team's dynamic stretching. The goalie's going to get warmed up. Then we're going to do this stick work drill. Then we're going to do this maybe shooting drill and defensive footwork drill simultaneously. Then we're going to do this uneven situation, some 2-on-3s, some 4-on-3s, and then the game starts, right? Maybe it's a fraction of that for your group, but I think every coach can appreciate having some structure so that as that warm up is happening, you have the ability to make sure everything's going on time. You have a conversation with the referees. There's several things that need to happen before the game actually starts. And then to get into the philosophy of, sideline etiquette, let's say, for the coach, I think that a lot of coaches, could really benefit from learning that lesson that you've learned over the years, KB. I mean, I think as a blanket statement, a lot of coaches probably coach too much on game day. And as we've talked in past episodes about parents on the sidelines kind of saying too much, it's really the same thing for coaches. For an athlete to be out there and seeing what they're seeing and feeling the ball in their stick and trying to make that next decision either on like thinking through it or just being on gut instinct, to then hear the voice of the coach to say, do this, and then they have to kind of analyze that and try to make a decision, and then if they get it wrong, they can feel the disappointment of the coach, and it can have a lot of negative effects to it, especially if it's done super consistently, which I know a lot of athletes don't appreciate. Right? But I also think there's a time and a place for it, right? There's that ability to build that trust with your group of athletes, where if coach does say, hey, look at the middle, he's not barking the whole time. So if I hear that voice and I can really trust that might have the ability to be a nice play for us. But maybe that's more of like the 5, 6, 7, 8 select level that you're really trying to like time those perfect coaching cues. So I personally have always been more of a just observe. I'm really not that into even like talking to the refs too much. I really just like to wait till they're off the field. And then a lot of times I find it interesting because I'll be like, remember this play? And they don't even remember. And so I'll have to like either be like, you know what, we'll talk about this either after the game, or I draw it up quickly. Like, okay, when you're in this type of situation, this is a better option than that. But to me, for me to bark it out consistently, I think is a waste of my energy. So I really think there probably is a middle ground, but we need to lean way more towards where you're at, KB, of just let them play. And that's going to be true in the practice environment as well, in that strategy of, letting them make their own decisions, letting them make their own mistakes, and then having conversations afterwards, making sure they understand the context and why one decision might be better than another is something that they have to really, conceive and could consider. And it takes brain power. It's not going to happen in the moment while they're on the field. So patience as a coach, I think, is key.
My biggest takeaway from listening to that was the word trust that you threw out there. And I think the reason why coaches, and I'm guilty of it as well, that we kind of micromanage is because we don't necessarily trust that they're going to see the guy or the gal that's wide open on the crease. But the reality is they will. These kids are going to see it. And I've had instances where I've shouted out, 14, he's open, hit him. And the player does it, and they came back after, and they're like, I was going to do that. I said, you know what? You're right. I got to trust you. I know you're going to do that. And if they don't, no big deal, right? This is the beauty of youth sports. You didn't see it. Let's come back, and to your point, Marty, let's talk about it. But I think a lot of it comes down to building that trust and putting it in their hands to say, I trust you're going to go out there and see the field and make these decisions. And if you don't, then, our job as adults is to kind of help point that out. And as long as it's in a constructive way, not berating a kid because they missed the open pass, but just keep an eye on that. If you notice that they tend to be getting off their defender pretty often. So just keep a look at that in the second half here as we gear up for second half. So I kind of want to kind of follow up, Marty, with you and ask, you talked a little bit about preparation at practice, kind of getting ready. This is how we're going to do our game day warm up. How much time, if at all, do you spend before that first game with your practice squad talking, hey, this is what it's going to be like on game day. This is what the coaches are going to be doing. These are the things that we're going to be talking to you. Is that something that you address?
I'd say at a bare minimum, let's say you're going to have 15 minutes to warm up before a game. It's the first 15 minutes of the pregame practice at a bare minimum. And then I would like to follow up as well about, I think like what we want to work towards as coaches. If I'm watching a lacrosse game and the athletes on the field are communicating a ton, that is incredible. And the way that the coach is communicating, as they call out things that they see, the athletes are oftentimes going to kind of parrot that as far as like, hey, oh, you should have done that. And then they get disappointed, right? That's probably copied from the coach, and it's like, it can be extremely beneficial. I think of a simple scenario of someone running the ball up on a clear and they kind of start to jog while a defender is like running them down from behind. And it's like someone on the defense going, hey, you got someone behind you, like, like watch your back, that might land a lot better than the coach saying the exact same thing. And so as, I'm trying to build the skill set of my players on game day as a coach, some of the things I'm saying, I'm intentionally trying to get my bench players and get the players on the field to start to say those things for me and to start to, hey, what are we really trying to notice? And that can be something to really think about as a coach, is like, what do I want my players to be noticing? And we've also probably instructed, like our defense as a great example. There should be a lot of communication on defense. Hey, I got your help left. I got your help right. I'm on ball. You want the goalie to kind of say ball's top left, ball's top right. Some of the foundational things we can be saying. But then you adding like names to it, like, hey, Jessica, like, recover, like something specific of like, that is so much more effective than the coach barking it from the sidelines. And so I think that's just where my mind goes, is kind of like an end game of like where we really want to get to is the players to be able to communicate effectively amongst themselves. That would be ideal.
And be the coaches on the field, like coach each other, right?
Exactly.
I think that's brilliant. So I think we all kind of universally agree to give up that control, let them play a little bit, guide as needed, right? When they're blatantly missing it, that's where our observation and our expertise and experience comes in handy. Let's talk a little bit about the things that we're doing and the things that we're saying, in an ideal world, not focusing on what we're not to do, but what kind of things are we doing and saying? And let's start with doing. What kind of things are you doing on game day from your position?
Yeah.
Kevin.
And one thing you talked about before, I love to talk with the refs and talk. So, from when they get there, and this goes, on my soccer, when I coach soccer this fall, if I got that assistant ref on my side in front of me, man, he better be open for some conversation, because I like to, I want to have fun. I like to have fun, and I love to talk with them and kind of find out, what are they seeing? What are they hearing? Hey, oh, that was close, and just make sure, so that they can kind of get to know me, I think, in a way that, like, I'm not taking this, so seriously, or, I'm not yelling at them if I think it was a missed call. I'd be like, ooh, you saw that, and having fun with it, and da. So then when something does come a little bit more up, you can have, when you need to have that conversation with a ref, which happens, from time to time, where you want to talk to them about a play or a call. They know it's a little bit different. They know you've been lighthearted all game and things like that. So like you're talking about too. That's why I don't want my assistants talking to the refs obviously at all, with it, but barking things out, because I want to be able to talk and joke around with them at times, and then but then be serious when we think we need to, with it. But so wanted to make sure I touched on that. Again, I know we have a big challenge with, number of referees and, how they're treated and things like that. And I think if we can all treat them of like, hey, this is a game, so let's have fun. I'm here to have fun too. The kids are, I am. Hopefully you as a ref are here to kind of enjoy this, and be a part of it. And I'll be fun with you. If you want to, I've had a ref be like, no, you didn't have the angle. I'm like, all right, I trust you. I'll say that. I'm like, I'm like, yep, I'm not perfect. You have the better angle. Just want to make sure, And other times, like, yeah, make sure, let's get it next time. Hey, what are we doing? So, but having fun with it, I think, is important in a way, because sometimes, but then, you get that ref who doesn't want to have any fun. Like, hey, no talking. Then I'll be quiet too. You can pick up on that when it's not. They don't want to have that conversation back. Okay, I'll be quiet. I don't want to get on the ref's bad side. So I'm always just talking to have fun, and how can we make this, lighthearted, because I've had the ref maybe like, you know what, you may have been right, I may have missed it. I'm like, all right, that's good. That's all I want to know, And if you can admit that as a ref, I'm like, sweet, good, that's fine by me. Now at least you didn't just make a wrong call. If your angle was off, or I didn't see it from where I was, okay, that's perfectly good explanation for me. So we all make mistakes, or we're all, the things we see from a different angle from the refs is totally, determines how we think a call should be. So that was my long way. I think it's good to do that. Good to communicate with the refs. Good to chit chat with them at times, learn their personality. We all get a lot of the same refs throughout the year. So that's the other reason. Like, I want to make sure they have fun when they're reffing my game. So when they come back again in 2 weeks, they're like, oh, okay, this is going to be good. I'll banter back and forth. And, I'm pretty sure I don't cross the line and and things like that. But just to have some fun with it, because, it can just help too, learn what they're seeing and doing.
Awesome. Coach Marty, what are you doing on game day?
Yeah, I would say, to be specific here and to give some practical advice, number one is noticing effort plays. And as we've mentioned many times on this podcast, we want to be more behavior based than results based. And if I'm only celebrating when we score a goal, I think that's a little bit counterintuitive, or not counterintuitive, but counterproductive, right? I want to be getting hollering and hooting and clapping and cheering when I see someone run hard for a ground ball, whether they win that or not. I'm like, nice hustle, right? And so that should get hopefully spread out and have a ripple effect. And the second thing is, I want to be able to notice what maybe the other team is doing that I could sort of take advantage of. Hey, Jessica, when you run towards number 11 on their team, she seems to be really stepping away from the girl she's covering. So I want you to run towards her and then pass it to Sally. Like that's something I would say after a shift, or maybe when the ball's on the other side of the field. But as far as what I'm paying attention to, those are probably my top two things. Is I'm trying to encourage and really notice hustle plays for my team, and then start to look at, okay, what, based on how the flow of the game is going, could I give as like a strategic bit of advice to a particular player? And maybe that does translate to like the attack or like a group of our players. But a lot of times it ends up being one particular girl that I say, hey, I think if you try this, we might find some success. And then if they pull that off later, I get to, give myself a hug or whatever. But yeah, I'm getting the most fired up for the hustle plays and hoping that has a ripple effect. And if it doesn't have the ripple effect that I want, I'll turn around to the bench and say, our goalie just made a save. I didn't hear one of you guys cheer. What's up with that? And so I think that's really important for coaches to, keep their team accountable in that sense of like, what are you guys paying attention to? It should be this, this, and this, not just waiting for a goal to happen.
It is. It's the little things, Marty. And I think, kind of what you just said, and that's what I said earlier. Like, I love to, when the ball goes down the other way, I want to right then and there point out, to one of my players, like, that was it. That's what we talked. Remember, that's what we talked about in practice this week, or that was the play. Great job with, whatever. Be specific and catch them in the moment, and not, at the end of the game, or so and so. That how do we do that right there in the moment when they did something well? Or to, hey, let's make sure we're in, our feet are in better position next time we're playing defense on someone, to do that. And let's make sure we're looking to help that little bit earlier. We know their best player is driving down the right side. Let's be ready to help on that a step earlier next time, for it. Or goalie, great save. Because usually that big play down at that end defensively, you're talking to them, and next thing you know, you hear the cheer down at the other end. Because everyone gets excited. The defense makes a great play, and like you get fired up to try to bring it down the other end.
So you all collectively nailed a couple of good things that coaches can focus on, one of which is a little scouting of the other team, kind of watch to see their tendencies that you can pass along. Certainly hype, right? Creating good energy, high fives when they come off, right before they go on, that last little word of advice, go get them, go have some fun, play hard. Kevin does a little politicking with the refs, never a bad idea. One thing that I like to do, I stole this from Coach Ed McCarthy. I count passes, and I will literally count them in a tally mark on my clipboard, not goals. Someone else will do that for us for sure, but I count passes, and I will communicate that with these kids right here. We just had our 15th pass, and the kids get so excited about that. This next line of middies goes in, and they say, we're going to get 5 more. And we constantly tell them, all right, we're up to 20, we're up to 25 this quarter, we're up to whatever. Just that simple thing alone, and again, I stole this is an Ed McCarthy concept, but just counting the passes is going to turn these kids into selfless players that move the ball, and it's less about taking it and trying to heave-ho through the crease and get the score. They want to try to become effective teammates with one another, and they really get into that stat of how many completed passes we have. So that's something that I'll try to do on game day. If I'm kind of by myself, I'll be the one to do it. If I have some help that day, I might pass that stat on to someone else, but I really like that as well. Marty, look like you have something to add to this.
I would. I love that you have a clipboard with you on game day, coach. Maybe someone doesn't want to have the full clipboard. You could even just have an 8x11 sheet of paper that you fold into 4. And something I've seen many coaches do, and I think it's just really, really a good way to start to get a feel for the game and then have more specific things you might want to say during like halftime and if you have breaks, which is to keep a tally of what scenarios are goals being scored in. So like you could just draw one line down the paper, us, them. Every goal that's scored, you're basically just going to write, number 11 drove from X, and then next goal that you guys score, Sally won the draw, ran through 7 people, scored. And so you start to see like, are they scoring all their goals in transition? Are we turning it over on the clear? Is there something, are we doing really, really well in kind of the settled offense? You start to see some patterns. So I think that can be a really helpful tool, and it takes very minimal effort. It's like a 10-second, thought of intention right after a goal is scored. Put that tally mark, write 1 3 to 7 word statement of what that happened in that goal, a little bit of the context of the goal, and then during the timeouts or during the halftime, you look at that sheet and you might see some patterns, and that can help inform your communication with the group.
I think that's brilliant advice. I really like that because this game's so fast paced. You could forget that. You could kind of in your head think for a second, I remember that. Now all of a sudden you write down 3 alley side dodges that were successful. Now you have something to focus on at that first time out. So that's really good advice for people. I do use a clipboard. I do tend to laminate my sheets, old-fashioned style, case of the weather, where I have my roster printout. I'll also keep a stopwatch on my clipboard, and I'm very seriously monitoring how much midi time they have. No more than 2.5 minutes, and we have a new group, depending on the scenario. But try to keep that as fair and consistent as possible, as equal playing time, almost down to the second if you can. That's harder to do, easier to say than do, but it's just something that as not a prop necessarily, but just putting that on your clipboard tells people that you take that part seriously. So that's something that I've been in a good habit of doing. What are some of the things we're saying? What are the things that we are encouraging them? If not, go through X, elevate, pass it over to Timmy, get it to Grace, cut through. What should we be saying to these kids, either strategically or emotionally or just in good spirit in general?
One of my biggest things, and talked about it earlier, is it's off ball stuff. It's move. Make sure don't be a spectator. Out there. The more we move and communicate. We talked about that, but we know communication can be verbal and nonverbal and things like that, and especially offensively. Too many times we stand there and we're like, why are 4 of you just standing still? That's more in my head. I'm like, all right, here we go again. How do we get them to move? How do we get them, whatever the rotation cuts might be, depending what we're doing. But that starts at practice too, setting up those scenarios and making sure that we know where to move. I think a lot of time, I remember, again, first couple of years, like telling that, like, let's be moving. I think someone were like, where am I supposed to move to? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. The ball's on the opposite side high. What am I supposed to do? Those types of things. I think communicating some of that in practice of like, okay, depending where you are and where the ball is, what are your movement options for it, and how you're going to do that and recognize it. And same thing. And guess what? It's okay if 2 of us go and try to make a cut through the 8 together and almost run into each other. It's going to happen. I'd rather that than you 2, standing out in the sides picking daisies. As long as we're doing that, eventually good things will happen.
I love that.
Yeah, and I alluded, I kind of already spoke to, some of what I might be saying with the encouragement of effort and things like that. But to get a little more specific and to build on it, on the offensive side of the ball, I'm really looking for cuts. So I can encourage a cut, whether the ball carrier saw them, whether they got open or not. Anytime I have like a nice hard, anything more than 5 yards of a cut, I think a lot of times you see this all the way through high school is like someone will cut a little bit, not really get open, and then they'll kind of revert back to where they started. It's like, no, just keep going and kind of cycle back through and continue that cut. So that's something I really try to look for. On the other side of the ball, it's kind of a form of a cut, but you can get more specific with, your defensive approach. And that could be on or off the ball, right? How that player is giving a little bit of effort. Usually it's a little less yardage, maybe 5, maybe 7 yards of like stepping out to who they're matched up with. I'm looking for that. I'm trying to encourage that. I'm saying nice approach, whether they get beat or not, right? So that's something I'm looking for.
You hit some great points. I think that these are great things that we should be saying, both of you. One thing that I'll add, especially at the younger levels, with the younger kids, I think one of the hardest things to do for them is to match up, is to just know that who they're covering and just to fix that. I have a special kind of magic word, and it used to change year to year, but I would shout it out, or any of the coaches would shout it out, or we give the onus to the goalie to also get to shout out. And once somebody hears that word, they all shout out the number that they're covering. 14, 17, they do it verbally out loud. So when I'm saying something on game day, chances are 90% of the time it's this particular word, which over the last couple of years for us is Bluefish. That's a river that runs through Duxbury, so it has a little bit of sentimental value to us. But I'm yelling Bluefish, and everyone yells out the number they cover. That's really, really effective. Short story, but I used to allow the kids to pick this word because we say it so often. So I remember one year was Doritos, another year it was pineapple. But I put a stop to this practice because the team all collectively voted to have the word be SpongeBob SquarePants. And in the first 3 minutes of this game I scream out SpongeBob SquarePants, and 150 people looked at me like, where's his straitjacket? How'd they let this guy out? So I said, you know what? No more you guys pick the words. It's now my word. But the point of it is that it's kind of nice to have a little trigger that the kids match up with, and that's particularly effective for first, second, third, and fourth. And I use it with 7th and 8th graders too. If I feel like, hey, we're starting to lose our assignments a little bit, we're starting to get ball watch here. So Bluefish, and then all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, I gotta watch for these cutters.
That's awesome. I have one last. We our league, Mass Youth Lacrosse. Obviously our philosophies, and hey, it's about having fun. It's about competing, this and that. But I do. When we're playing at home, I remind my players pregame, like, hey, we're playing at Stoughton High School. This is our field. Like, let's have some pride. Let's have some town, community pride. We're playing Canton or Easton or Sharon, one of our neighbors. I'm like, I don't want to let them come in here and beat us on our field, and we'll talk about that. Like, I want intensity. I want effort, I don't care what. This is, have some pride in that for it. And I think that's important for these kids who, are playing, how many games a year and across all their different sports. And oftentimes it's, they're playing in some tournament or something somewhere against a team and they're never going to see them again, all this type of stuff. But like, I take pride in it. And, we're not the best and all that. And we're still, figuring out lacrosse here in town at times. But hey, let's have some pride that this is, especially our last game of the year. This is our last game. We're at home. Let's win. Let's win that one for that. Let's play hard for that. Play hard for one of my favorite things, Marty, you probably remember from the, early days of the Cannons was make your teammate better today. That was always that was a Coach Marmiani quote. And I love telling that to my players, like, make someone else better today. Make a teammate better today. Half the time they kind of look at you like, what am I supposed to do? Sometimes I tell them, sometimes I just kind of leave it and like, think about it. I don't know, come up with something, on your own. And can you figure out how to make a teammate better? And we all know it. There's probably nothing better when you actually do make a teammate better and you recognize that spot, that I did, help them, with a struggle, with a challenge, or just, hey, we worked together, at this one instance and boom, and we got the goal. We made the big defensive stand, whatever it might be.
I love that, Coach. I really love the first part of what you said, KB, around, you've said this before, Coach Joey, too. Competition is not a dirty word. And we've built in systems within Mass Youth Lacrosse to try to do things the right way, but that's not downgrading the level of compete that we should have on game day when we play. We still want to play as hard as we can. And it reminds me of a Lyle quote where he talks about the harder you play, the stronger the medicine. And that's part of like respecting yourself and respecting the game and the whole bit. It's like, look, we have this opportunity where we've been practicing against the same color jerseys during the week, where now we get to play against another town, another color jersey, and this is our chance to compete as hard as we can with class, with respect, respecting the referee, respecting the opponent, respecting the opposing coaches, playing in such a way that our sibling can play tomorrow. But we want to play as hard as we can, and let's try to do as well as we can. And I hope they do too, right? And I really hope that they bring their best today, because that's the kind of sports environment that we can all, benefit the most from. So I think that's a really positive thing to say every single game day, is to remind us and kind of give a little bit of perspective, and you can get fired up, but also just like a level of appreciation around like, man, we get to play today. Like, let's go. And I think that can be an energy booster.
And that pride in the community is a great motivator. To Kevin's point, this is Stoughton High School field, the field that you'll all be playing on someday. Let's defend it today. Let's make sure that they're not going to beat us on effort, at least, something like that, which I think is awesome. What I was going to say is this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more we can get into, but I feel like the three of us have given a great deal of good advice for some simple concepts on game day to let go of the control, let the kids play more, and be, advice forward with them and guide, especially on the bench as they come off. We can talk to the kids then and see what we're seeing. But I just wanted to ask this before we get into our Q&A section. How does game day coaching differ than practice coaching? And again, that practice coaching could be 2 or 3 episodes in itself, but 30,000 foot elevation, what kind of things are happening in practice that necessarily aren't, from a coaching perspective, happening on game day?
Yeah, I think it is that's what I'm trying to be, the coach, and instruct, not every little thing, but that's what I'm going to be more detailed. It's going to blow the whistle and stop in the middle of a drill and be like, hey, no, this is what we want to do, and do that. And in my head is like, okay, that's then the one, especially that girl who has that mistake in practice, and we correct it, stop it, correct it right there on the spot. That's what I'm looking for in game, to wait till they come off, or again, when it's on the other side, and be like, that was it. You did it. That's what I wanted. Those are the things I think we can stick in their head, and find that joy in it. But that's a challenge too. I'm not saying like single out players all the time, things with it, but it's more remind everyone like, hey, I think nowadays, my town, half my players, lacrosse is their second sport of the spring, things like that. So they're not always as amped up at practice to, work on split dodges. And all right, again, here we go, and it's how do we get them to, hey, we need to work on it harder here so that in practice it comes more naturally and it's just that little bit, easier for you when there's real competition out there, taking it seriously now. And, again, all at that same time of having the fun. How do we work things, into making it fun? I try to do little things where they get to compete against coach and some things. I love to get out there and play defense, and be like, hey, make me look silly, juke me out and do it. And then they're like, okay, they'd rather make me look silly than their friend, stuff like that. But how do we work on some of those little things? How do we build to game day? It's a challenge at times. I have a big challenge in my town. I'll show up to practice and there's 3 boys teams and, 3 girls teams, and we're on one field that's not lined, and I get a corner piece of grass trying to do things. So it's tough to recreate game day things all the time. But how do we work on skills to get them better, to get them more confident, to be ready to play on game day?
I love that. How about you, Marty?
Love it. I think rules-based thought process is probably way more prevalent on game day. You have to be oriented around the rules of the game, where on practice, you get to make up rules sometimes, and that's one of my big call outs to coaches is like, use a 3-second rule during small-sided games to get players to be more unselfish, make decisions quicker, and it's actually a little bit of a magic sauce to get players to move more off ball. When there's a limited amount of time each player can have the ball in their stick, as opposed to making a pass rule, right? So that's obviously different. Objectively, your ability to, like you said, Kevin, blow the whistle, completely stop what we're doing, and have a conversation about it, or make an adjustment, or add a rule, or change the drill altogether, right? And just like alter, hey, I was going to do this, this, and this today, but based on what I'm seeing, I'm just going to completely shift. Practice, you just have so much control over the environment as a coach. I was having a conversation with a longtime master strength coach who'll be a guest on this podcast, but he was talking about, he trains the Harvard men's lacrosse team, and actually the women's as well in speed and agility. But he does a drill where they're kind of balancing on one foot. They're all partnered up and they're kind of pushing each other and trying to knock each other off balance. And he's like, he got 54 of these like grown Division I athletes, and within 2 minutes, they're all giggling and having a good time. Practice, like that's what practice is about, is like making things feel like a game. And I think we can learn from some of the strategy we've talked about as a game day coach to like let them play a little more. I think that's still applicable at the practice environment. But you're going to have 75 different mini environments in one given practice session. If you've got that ability to kind of shift and flow into different things as the practice goes on. But gamifying things at practice is key. Having the thought process of, like you said, KB, we're going to do split dodges today because we need to work on that. And it's like, it's just a cone out there where even just having an assistant coach stand there with a pool noodle smacking people as they run by, like, there's a different energy when they go through the drill, when there's that level of like challenge and competition and like, oh, this is weird and fun. And, I think that's part of our job as coaches at practice, is to gamify as much as possible and getting those smiles, getting those giggles, because believe it or not, you end up getting more effort when you do.
Really cool. So I think I'm going to echo something that Kevin said earlier, which is he tends to, especially starting off his coaching on game days, would lose his voice. And then you kind of realize a couple of years in, get back. That's when I lose my voice, is at practice. That's when I'm rolling up my sleeves and says, this is my time. Game days for the kids. Practice time is for mine. This is a little bit of a preview of something that we'll talk about down the road, but I have 2 different practice templates. I have a Tuesday practice that we call the auto body, and this is our very mechanical practice. So oil changes, calibrations, tune-ups, those are all metaphors, by the way. But this is a really technical, heavy practice that we are really focusing on the skills. And then on Thursdays, we call it the laboratory. And so we're playing and we're experimenting and we're failing, and we do a lot of just play it out. Do 3 reps, bring it in, let's talk about it. What worked, what didn't work, what felt natural, what felt forced, what could our teammates have done to help us, what did we feel like we could do more to help our teammates, and kind of, manipulate, roll around and kind of get mucky with it in terms of like figuring out what we want to do. And that's the time that I put probably most amount of my time and effort into as a coach, is that practice environment of let's talk this out. And then on game days, now you know it. Now you've learned. Go out there and do it. I love what you said, Marty, about changing the rules, giving them some time discrepancies that kind of force those decisions to be made at practice. Let them kind of figure it out. And those turn into good habits on game days that, will pay dividends later. So I'm all about this. I'm a practice coach more than anything. And so I think that's something that we all kind of agree is a really important element here, is a little bit of a different approach, right?
Yeah, and I just want to build on this too, Joey, because we've talked about this a little bit in past episodes, but this topic is so valuable, because if I have the ability to have those conversations mid-practice, mid-drill even, of like, what went well, what did you see in that drill that could have been adjusted, and like the words that we're now using, the language that we're having, that's going to end up being the language that we want on the field on game day in some scenarios, and so it's like, it's that breeding ground of like, what are we noticing, and like having those conversations. Some players will start to really say really thoughtful things, and they start to notice things a little bit more because they know we're going to have a conversation about this, and I have to be conscious while I'm at practice with Coach Joey. Like, I'm going to get asked, and if I get put on the spot and I don't really know, he's not going to give me a hard time, but he's probably going to come back to me in the next drill. And I have to say something today. And so bringing that presence out in practice, and then, having some thought around what you call things. You don't have to, yell out SpongeBob every time you want to hear who you got, but what do you call the spots on the field if it's not like the generic things? What do you call, hey, I want to pass the ball around a couple times before we try to really attack the goal? What do you call, we're down by a goal and we want to really press out on the adjacent players when number 9 has the ball because they're maybe not as good with the ball? Those are things that, you want to have those conversations at practice, which are obviously going to then translate to the game. So I think it's really, really an important call to action to coaches, and it has to do with the vocabulary and being conscious about what you call things, and getting those conversations started with intention early and often at practice.
Well, Marty, as an English major, that's music to my ears. So I love that. Kevin, anything to add? Did we miss anything before we hit the outside coaches asking a couple of questions? Anything that we could talk about that I didn't set you up for?
I think, my last thing always for coaches, again, I think just hit a lot of the themes though of on game days, have fun too and enjoy it. Enjoy the fruits of the labor of practice. And, again, being able to think about those things, to point them out to players. I do it oftentimes on my bench when I'm like, yes, remember, that's what I was talking about at practice and you did it. Oh my God. Be that person who's super excited that, we did one, it could be the most minor thing in the world. But I think when they see that you're excited about the little things like that, that's when, it continues to grow, and like, okay, now what's the next step, for us and for me as a player too.
Very cool. So we have a couple of questions from some outside coaches on topic. These are for anybody, so jump in if you have a good answer. I like this first one quite a bit, actually. What are some tips to address the coaching that the players get from the other sideline? So from the parents.
Yeah, you got to call it out. That's the biggest thing. I do it in my preseason. Try to do a meeting with all the families.
Get ahead of it a little bit.
Yeah, and just also too, so that if you do have to call it out during the season, you kind of have that, like I said
I
this
did tell
already.
you.
I'm not making it up as I go here, but we talked about this, and again, I kind of went through that double stage of it where early on when I was trying to coach every little thing, and then I would hear them saying things that were almost the opposite, and obviously usually telling their kid to do something different than what we want them to do, and explaining how confusing that can be and challenging as a coach, probably challenging as a coach, and then God, can you imagine how confusing it is for your kid when I'm telling them to do something and you're yelling do something different, and so on and so forth. And again, it's that, hey, be supportive. Let's and I try to explain to them what I do. It like, hey, I'm not yelling at them all game what to do. I'm letting them play. I'm letting them make the decisions. If they make a decision and I talk about it afterwards or later during the game, like, hey, let's make sure we're looking at this first or whatever it might be, and then they do the same thing wrong again, yeah, that's we're gonna elevate that up to, all right, you got to come back off. We got to talk about that again, type thing, but not to jump on anyone too. I mean, yeah, there's some parents who every time their kid makes a mistake and they're yelling at them, and it's tough to even see sometimes and hear, because I'm like, man, that kid's more scared to make a mistake, where I've just been out there telling them make a mistake. So I tell the parents that too, like, hey, I'm encouraging that. Try. Effort's the number one. Let's let them do it. Coach will work on reinforcing or correcting either, in game, at post game practice. But if what you can help me out is not, not trying to coach, or like me, I don't have the riches of all these people want to coach. I'm like, if you want to do it, then you're going to sign up and coach and stand next to me.
I like that a lot. Yeah, you just found your practice coach. You might not want him, but you just found a practice coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Marty, how about you?
Well, I think maybe there's a spot for that third or fourth game day coach of opposite sideline etiquette, right? If let's say it's a parent that's being a little bit, obnoxious, and we know it's one of our players' parents, I think it's obviously a different scenario if it's from the opposing team. There's less control there. In that case, it's probably more of a conversation with the other coach and the referee to see if there's something that can be done to, a lot of times it's the ref that they're giving a hard time to, and obviously it's tough if it's a young kid that they're being discouraging to, but a lot of times it's the ref who's taking the flack. But something as simple as like having a coach relocate himself and walk around the field and just hang out near where these barks are coming from, a lot of times they start to quiet down a little bit. And so that can be a little trick to have up your sleeve, is just like whichever your coach is least afraid of confrontation, just kind of let's just stroll over there and hang out there for 5 minutes. And if a comment needs to be made about like, hey, this really isn't helpful, do you think you could, as respectfully as possible, you think you could keep it down? And sometimes that's what needs to be done, because whether it's the ref or the player that they're barking at, it's really not that helpful. We're hoping that the far sideline can be encouraging fans, and that the coaching is really not coming from over there. So it's still going to happen. We know, people have opinions. There's no way around that. But I think you got to do something about it. If we just complain about it and then never actually take action, we're just as bad in some way. So I think we got to be prepared to take some action in a respectful manner and in a way that upholds our values of like, look, we want these kids to play. We want them to make mistakes. Sometimes what you're saying is contradicting what I'm saying. So either, like you said, Kevin, join our staff and coach with us and work with us, or just be a fan. Like, what works for you. So, we've got to be prepared to have some adult conversations on the sidelines in the spring. And it's true for every youth sport that this is dealt with.
So the most important part there is setting the expectations, right? So having that preseason meeting where you say, this is what I'm expecting out of the sidelines, having that email, that way you can call back to it and have it as, almost a written decree. This is what this team believes in. So please follow along. Beautifully answered. Here's one that we've talked about, actually, kind of at great length, Kevin, a little bit about your talking with the officials, because the question is, what, if any, interaction are you expected to have with the officials? And when and how can we be honest if we feel like something major needs to be addressed with the way the game is being officiated? So you kind of started by saying that you develop a rapport early on. I know that in MYL, they mandate for every game a pregame meeting between the two head coaches and the officials, which is always a really, really wonderful idea to establish the team of adults at the beginning of the game. So for those that maybe aren't as talkative throughout and, having lighthearted conversations, what do we feel is the appropriate way if, like, let's just say maybe safety? That's the thing we hear most often is, I lost my cool, but safety was on the line. My kids were getting cross-checked and there was no calls about it. So what is some good advice for a coach to handle that in a very calm, respectful manner that's going to actually positively impact the game? Because I can tell you, spoiler alert, running out and breaking the clipboard over your knee and pointing and screaming, "What are you, blind?" is never going to cut it, ever. It's never going to work. But it happens. We've seen it.
Yes, it does. But yeah, like you said, I mean, it starts with the pregame meeting. Do I have one every time? Yes. Is it really a meeting? Is it sometimes we got 30 seconds? Hey, how you doing? I'm Kevin. What, you are so-and-so, just a almost icebreaker type thing. Like, thanks for coming. Glad you're here. See Jay after, and he's got your check. I always joke with all the coaches. I always tell them when home games, I usually get the checks from my president, and I want to hand them to the refs when they get there and be like, hey, I got your pay. Like, I'm with you. I'm a good guy here. Again, creating a rapport yes, I don't think it helps me, getting calls, things like that, but at least it helps me like, hey, I'm with you. That's almost more what I'm looking for. Like, I'm not against you here, as a coach. So when I do say something later, I'm not the jerk, I'm the guy who just handed you a check, I'm the guy who said hi, with it. But I think sometimes what I hear from other coaches is that, like you said, something's going on in the game. Sometimes the refs get defensive. If you just go out, especially like you said, you go out and break the clipboard, they're going to be like, oh, get back, coach. What are you doing? That type of thing. Where I always say, like, either call a timeout or at a point, ask the ref, hey, can we talk? But then I go right to the other coach. Hey, can we all talk? So I'm not directly walking out confronting the ref. I'm more kind of bringing the coach over, the ref over to the other coach to talk at midfield. So it's the three of us. Can we talk about what's going on? Not what the heck's going on here? How come how are you letting this game get out of control? My kids are getting killed. We've all had those games, but I think trying to diffuse that, like you said, how can the adults have a conversation about what's going on? Start with that, so you're not attacking the ref, even though you feel like they're the ones who aren't calling things. They've let it go too far, missing things. Ask the question of the other coach, the first question. Hey, are you seeing this do you think this is getting out of hand a little bit? Do we think we're getting a little too rough or on both sides? Try to attack it that way. So if the other coach is like, yeah, it's getting very chippy, then you can kind of, all right, what can we all do? And then you turn and look at the ref. That's your job, right?
Some great advice I received a long time ago, so I've been using this for a long time, is anytime you do have one of those conversations with the referee, is to stand shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. That face to face almost always brings that sense of this is a confrontation. Whereas if you and I are standing side by side talking about it, it's a better sense of we're going to have a little communication. And usually the way I will frame it is, Jimmy, from where I'm standing, it really looks like they might be kind of getting really high and their hands up. It looks like a cross check, but you're closer. So what are you seeing? And that kind of open-ended dialogue, they'll get honest answers. Usually I'll get that referee saying, geez, coach, to be honest with you, I missed it. I haven't been really watching. I've been watching the ball, but I'll keep an eye on the second half of the game here. I'll see if they're doing that. And that's sometimes a victory enough alone just to call their attention to it, but to do so in a way that's more conversational than confrontational. So that's some good advice I wanted to pass along.
That's my favorite. And I think I said it earlier too, though, like even during the game when I'm talking to him, my favorite phrase, what are you seeing? I love to ask that question of the ref. If there's things, in the girls' game shooting space, I still, whatever, but I'll ask sometimes like, hey, what are you seeing? From where I'm standing, I didn't think she, crossed into her path and knew it. Like, what are you seeing? Because I want to know. And yeah, like
Help
you said,
me
it
help you.
usually
That's
comes
right.
across. You usually get a better response from the ref when you're asking them that. And they're going to say, nope, I was in the right spot and I saw it this way. Okay, great. Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
This isn't foolproof advice. They can still turn around and say, get back to your bench. But most of them, like, and Kevin, you established that, we're on the same team here. Always great to let them know how important their role is. We don't have a game without the referees. End of discussion. So welcoming them, I love that part of the game too. Welcome to our field. What can I do for you if you need water? We're not buying the refs that, sometimes I've been accused of playing that politics games. No, but you're just saying, hey, we're the team of adults here and I'm on it. I'm on your side today. So I think that's a great precedent to start. Develop these relationships. To your point, Kevin, in the town level, we see the same refs week after week. Like the hometown refs are going to take the closest assignments, and you're going to have the same referee 3-4 times in the season. So you're looking for battles that you don't want. If you're that first time you have them, you're at each other's throats. You want to make sure that you're in simpatico with the people who are calling the game for sure. Marty, what's your take on this?
I think you guys had a really good foundation there, and around the safety of the players. I think that's probably the thing to make sure that there kind of has to be a conversation. And so great advice from you guys on that. I think I just want to make mention to maybe the more toxic end of the communication that ends up happening. And what I would say is let's be honest about our own biases and our own assumptions. This is going to be true for coaches and for parents. But what I see, as I'm labeling it kind of more toxic, is that anything that goes against your team is somehow wrong and the referee is trying to screw you. It's like, can we just test our assumption there a little bit? And do you think that maybe this referee is just trying to do their job and they're not out here at a youth lacrosse game trying to screw anyone over? So can we just let that be at the center of our understanding of what's going on the field here? And if it's it goes on and on and on, you're like, this ref's really trying to screw us. It's as a coach, I'm like, challenge accepted. It's I'm going to talk to my guys hey, we're not getting a lot of calls from the ref right now. Let's just be that much better about being clean and doing things the right way, because anything in the gray area is clearly getting called right now, so we have to play that way. And so yeah, just testing our own assumptions and biases. It's that's what I see. I think from the toxic side of it is any call that's not your team is somehow come on, right? Let's get over ourselves a little bit.
For sure. And that's a human thing. That's all sports. That's not just ours. That's just something about humans versus the stripes. There's just this. We'll talk more about that at length, I'm sure, but always a great idea to be on the same team with them. Last question. There have been a few instances in which I've been all by myself on game days, and I find that they are some of our most fun games because I'm so focused on managing the sub box, the kids just go play with very little direction. But I sacrifice adjustments we can make during breaks because I'm not as zeroed in as I'd like to be. So are we sacrificing growth opportunities by lacking that adult leadership we have with multiple sets of eyes? So I guess the question here is, minimum, we should have 2 coaches. I think that's sort of what we're assuming and trying to answer, I guess.
My initial reaction is no, and that's because what a great opportunity to, on those timeouts and halftime moments, what are you guys seeing? I need your help. I'm focusing on the substitution box. What happened on that last play when we scored? What happened on that last play when they scored? Who noticed what? And it's I think a lot of athletes are actually going to step up in that scenario, and I think that's a huge growth opportunity, not a lack.
So what I just heard, Kevin, is one coach, that's it. Get rid of everybody.
No,
you're right.
and it does, there's the perfect world scenarios of these teams, like Marty, you just said, and I think maybe 7th, 8th grade, be asking some of the players to step up and help be, second eyes, another coach, hey, help make sure we're getting subs on and off. But I've been there at, 3, 4, and 5, 6, where I was the only one, and oh wow, it wasn't quite as fun, and because you're dealing with, I lost my mouth guard and my cleats keep coming untied, but I need someone to go in and I'm not ready, and something happened on the field and I didn't see it, and oh my God, you lose control a little bit too. So it's
so that might not have been as fun for you, but do you think the kids had a little bit more fun because Coach Barney wasn't all over where they were going?
I thought I was a lunatic, trying to figure everything out and run it.
I had the most fun today. Coach Barney was tying shoes and looking for mouth guards, and he wasn't watching me.
Yeah, no, it humbles you for sure as a coach. Okay, just play, and so yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not a bad thing as long as you're not, something's going on where you're just totally missing and players are doing whatever they want type thing, and that can be good and bad. That can be your best player just ball hogging it, and coach isn't watching, so I'm gonna score 6 goals today. He usually makes me pass the ball, stuff like that. But yeah, it all depends on the circumstance, and you can, usually if the other coach is cool and you're like, hey, I've been there, I'm like, I'm all by myself today, so let's have some fun, and then it can be a good experience.
So to put a bow on it, again, I don't worry so much about the numbers so much as I want to say find the right coaches that value what you value and agree with what you all are going to be doing on game day, of how you're going to communicate and what you care about and how you're going to do it. Kevin, it sounds like you found an amazing co-coach with you. You've had for a very long time. You have a lot of trust with one another. So I think that's more important than I have one or two or three or whatever. Just make sure you're on the same page. Marty, you have something to add to that?
Just one more like kind of practical bit of advice would be, it becomes a lot harder if you're on the way to the game and your assistant coach texts you, hey, can't make it today. That's different, right? But if you know you're going to be the only coach that day, I would just really encourage coaches, and you can do this for every game. I think Coach Joey, you kind of alluded to the fact that you do, and you laminate it and let's go. But be like, here's group one, here's group two, here's group three, here's our subbing pattern today. You're going to go from defense to midfield to attack or whatever it might be, and just have some semblance to simplify your substitution process, because that will be probably the heaviest load to manage while trying to do everything else that game day coaching requires. So if you can do a little bit of upfront work and sort of pre-plan some of your substitution groupings, that would definitely be some practical advice for coaches.
Great advice. Awesome stuff. Hey, this was an amazing conversation. Like I said, tip of the iceberg. There's so much more we can and will discuss as it relates to great game day coaching strategies. But I think that we hit a lot of the important stuff that coaches need to hear and reinforce. This is typically the part of the episode where we thank Mass Youth Lax, in particular the ops team, like Kevin, for their support. But we happen to have Kevin as our guest here. So we actually get to thank you twice. Number one, for lending your advice and your part of the conversation as a great coach in the Stoughton Youth Lacrosse program. Really an inspiration to all. It's great that you can have somebody at the league leadership who actually embodies what we preach, and I know you do that. So thank you for all you do as a coach, and certainly for everything you do for all the kids as the director of MYL. We want to thank the listeners for your continuing to support and chime into these conversations. We're excited to start having some live ones that the coaches can actually give more than just a couple of Q&As at the end. And last for me, and then I'll let you both sign off, I just wanted to again wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving time with your families. And I know a lot of programs, my own included, are going to start ramping up winter skills right after Thanksgiving. So I am very grateful to pick up my whistle again and flip the calendar to 2026. Here we come, baby.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Kevin. See you all next week.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.